Mariana Williams stepped out of her black Tesla and handed the keys to the valet. The cool evening air carried the sound of laughter and clinking glasses from inside the grand ballroom. She took a deep breath and smoothed down her navy blue dress. Tonight was the annual Tech Innovation Awards, the biggest event of the year in Silicon Valley. Everyone who mattered in the tech world would be here. She walked toward the entrance, her heels clicking against the marble steps. The building looked like something from a movie, with its tall columns and golden lights. People in expensive suits and dresses were walking in, all smiles and confident handshakes, but Mariana felt that familiar knot in her stomach. She knew what was coming. As the founder and CEO of TechFlow Solutions, a company worth over $50 million, Mariana had every right to be here. Her AI software helped major corporations save millions by fixing their broken systems. She had built this company from nothing, working 16-hour days and sleeping on her office couch for the first 2 years. Now she had over 200 employees and offices in 3 cities, but none of that seemed to matter when she walked into rooms like this. The security guard at the door barely looked at her invitation before waving her through. Inside, the ballroom was even more impressive. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, casting warm light over hundreds of people. Round tables covered in white cloth filled the space, each one decorated with fresh flowers. A stage at the front held the podium where tonight's speakers would stand. Mariana recognized faces from magazine covers and news interviews. There was the CEO of CloudTech, the woman who had built the biggest data storage company in the world. Over by the bar stood the founder of Gaemon, whose mobile apps had made him a billionaire before he turned 30. These were her peers, people who had built empires just like she had. So why did she feel like she didn't belong? She made her way to the registration table to pick up her name tag. The young woman behind the table looked confused when Mariana gave her name. Mariana Williams, let me check. The woman scrolled through her tablet, frowning. Oh, here you are. But this says you're the CEO of TechFlow Solutions. That's right, Mariana said. Keeping her voice steady, the woman looked up at her, then back at the screen. Oh, I just ... I thought maybe there was a mistake. You look so young. Mariana had heard variations of this her whole career. Sometimes it was about her age. Sometimes it was about being a woman. Sometimes people were more direct about what really bothered them. She took her name tag and smiled politely. Thank you. Walking into the crowd, Mariana felt the familiar weight of being watched. Conversations seemed to pause as she passed. She caught glimpses of people nudging each other, pointing discreetly in her direction. Some faces showed genuine curiosity. Others showed something less friendly. She spotted David Chun, the CEO of NextGen Industries, someone she had worked with on a previous project. He was talking to a small group near the bar. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up. Mariana, great to see you here. He shook her hand warmly. Everyone, this is Mariana Williams. She's the genius behind TechFlow Solutions. The introductions went smoothly, but Mariana noticed the subtle shift in body language. The way some people stepped back slightly, the forced smiles. The questions that felt more like tests than genuine interest. So what exactly does your company do? Asked a man in a gray suit. Mariana had given this explanation thousands of times. We specialize in AI-driven system optimization. When companies have outdated or broken processes, we use artificial intelligence to redesign them from the ground up. We've helped reduce operational costs by an average of 35% for our clients. Interesting, the man said, but his tone suggested he found it anything but interesting. And how long have you been in tech? Another test question. Mariana knew what he was really asking. How did someone like her end up running a tech company? About 12 years. I started programming in college and worked my way up through several startups before launching TechFlow 5 years ago. The conversation continued, but Mariana could feel the energy shifting. Some people seemed impressed despite themselves. Others looked skeptical, as if they were waiting for her to prove she belonged here. And a few looked openly hostile. She excused herself and walked toward the appetizer table, where servers in white jackets offered tiny sandwiches and fancy cheese. The food looked beautiful, but her appetite had disappeared. This was supposed to be a celebration, a night to recognize innovation and success. So why did it feel like a battlefield? At events like this, Mariana always found herself thinking about her grandmother. Grandma Rose had cleaned office buildings for 40 years, working nights so she could raise 3 kids during the day. She used to tell Mariana stories about the fancy offices she cleaned, describing the important people who worked there. "One day, baby girl," Grandma Rose would say, "you're going to be sitting in those big chairs making those important decisions." Grandma Rose had died 2 years before TechFlow really took off. She never got to see Mariana's company featured on the cover of Tech Weekly magazine. She never got to watch her granddaughter give a keynote speech to 1,000 people. But Mariana carried her grandmother's words with her everywhere. Still, nights like this tested that confidence. As Mariana moved through the crowd, she noticed the way conversations changed when she joined them. Topics shifted from business deals to safer subjects like the weather or the food. People seemed to assume she was someone's guest rather than an industry leader in her own right. She had learned to navigate these situations over the years. Smile and be gracious. Let her work speak for itself. Don't give anyone a reason to call her difficult or aggressive. Build relationships slowly and prove her worth through results, not arguments. But tonight felt different somehow. Maybe it was because TechFlow had just announced their biggest contract ever, a deal with a Fortune 500 company that would triple their revenue. Maybe it was because 3 major tech publications had featured her company in recent months. Or maybe she was just tired of always having to prove herself. The evening was still young, but Mariana could already feel the weight of 100 small interactions ahead. Each handshake would be a chance for someone to judge whether she belonged. Each conversation would be an opportunity for subtle questions about her background, her qualifications, her right to be here. She didn't know it yet, but before the night was over, all of that would change. Someone was about to test her in a way that would shock everyone in the room, including herself. And her response would become the story that people in Silicon Valley would be talking about for years to come. For now, though, she simply stood in that beautiful ballroom, surrounded by the most powerful people in tech, and prepared herself for whatever the evening might bring. The cocktail hour was in full swing when Mariana finally started to relax. She had found her rhythm, moving from conversation to conversation with the confidence that came from years of practice. A few genuine connections had formed. Robert Kim from DataBridge seemed genuinely interested in a potential partnership. Lisa Rodriguez from Innovation Capital had even asked for her business card, but then she noticed them. A group of 4 men stood near the far corner of the ballroom, close to what looked like an old grand piano. They kept glancing in her direction, whispering among themselves and chuckling. Mariana recognized 2 of them immediately. Brian Thompson, CEO of CloudVault Systems, a company that had been losing market share to newer, more innovative competitors like TechFlow. Next to him stood Mitchell Reynolds, a venture capitalist known for his old-school approach and resistance to what he called diversity trends in tech. The other 2 men she didn't know personally, but their expensive suits and confident postures marked them as part of the same circle. The kind of men who had been running Silicon Valley for decades and weren't thrilled about the changes happening around them. Mariana tried to ignore them and focus on her conversation with a startup founder who was asking about TechFlow's client onboarding process, but she could feel their eyes on her. The weight of their attention made her skin crawl. "Excuse me for just a moment," she told the young entrepreneur, and stepped away to get some air. She walked toward the large windows that overlooked the city lights. The piano was closer now, and she could see why no one was using it despite the elegant setting. The beautiful instrument was clearly broken. Several keys were stuck in the down position. The bench was wobbly, with one leg shorter than the others. Even from a distance, she could see loose strings hanging inside the open lid. It seemed odd that such an expensive venue would have a broken piano on display. Maybe it was antique, kept for decoration rather than use. Or perhaps it had been damaged during setup and no one had bothered to move it. Beautiful instrument, isn't it? Mariana turned to find Brian Thompson approaching, his three companions. Following behind him, his smile was too wide, too friendly. She had learned to recognize that particular expression over the years. It was the smile people wore when they were about to say something they thought was clever. "It's a shame, it's broken," she replied politely. "Oh, is it?" Brian's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "I hadn't noticed." The other men gathered around them now, forming a loose circle. Mitchell Reynolds introduced the two she didn't know. Peter Walsh, a tech investor who had made his fortune in the early days of the Internet, and James Hartley, CEO of Traditional Systems, Inc., a company that had been around since before personal computers existed. "We were just talking about entertainment for the evening," Mitchell said, his voice carrying that particular tone wealthy men used when they thought they were being charming. "This gala is always so formal, so stiff. We need something to liven things up." "The scheduled program looks interesting," Mariana replied, though she could sense where this was heading. "Oh, the speeches will be boring as usual," Peter waved dismissively. "What we need is some real entertainment. Something with soul, you know?" The word soul hung in the air like a challenge. Mariana felt her stomach tighten. She had heard this kind of coded language before. "I'm sure the organizers have planned appropriate entertainment," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "But that's just it," Brian jumped in, his fake enthusiasm growing. "We were thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if someone could give us a more authentic performance?" "Authentic," Mariana repeated. "Yes." James clapped his hands together. "And then we noticed this beautiful piano sitting here, just waiting for the right person to bring it to life." "It's broken," Mariana pointed out again. "Oh, but surely someone with the right background could make it work," Mitchell said, his smile never wavering. "We've heard that natural talent can overcome any obstacle." The conversation was attracting attention now. Other guests were starting to notice the group gathered around the piano. Some were watching curiously, while others seemed to sense the tension and moved closer to hear what was happening. "Why don't you play something for us?" Peter suggested, gesturing toward the broken piano with a flourish. "I bet you have music in your blood. It would be such a treat for everyone here." The suggestion hit Mariana like a punch to the gut. They weren't asking her to play because they thought she was musical. They weren't asking because they respected her talents or wanted to hear beautiful music. They were asking because they wanted to reduce her to a stereotype, to turn her into entertainment for their amusement. She looked at the broken piano again. The stuck keys, the wobbly bench, the loose strings. They had chosen this moment, this broken instrument, specifically to humiliate her. If she tried to play and failed because of the piano's condition, they could laugh and say she wasn't as talented as she claimed. If she refused, they could paint her as difficult or ungrateful. "Come on," Brian encouraged, his voice getting louder so more people could hear. "Don't be shy. I'm sure you learned to play when you were young." "All the best musicians do," added Mitchell. The crowd around them was growing. Mariana could see curiosity, concern, and anticipation on different faces. Some people seemed to understand what was really happening here. Others appeared genuinely interested in hearing music. A few looked uncomfortable, as if they wanted to intervene but didn't know how. "I'm flattered by the suggestion," Mariana said carefully, "but I'm here as a CEO, not an entertainer." "Oh, but surely you can be both," James said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Besides, what's the point of having talent if you don't share it?" "The piano is clearly in no condition to be played," she pointed out. "That's what makes it interesting," Peter said. "A real challenge. I bet someone with your natural abilities could make beautiful music even with a broken instrument." There it was again. Natural abilities, as if any musical talent she might have came from her genetics rather than training and practice. As if she was somehow closer to music than technology. Despite having built a $50 million tech company, Mariana felt the familiar fire building in her chest. The same anger that had driven her to work twice as hard as everyone else her entire career. The same frustration that made her want to prove them all wrong. But she had learned over the years that anger alone wasn't enough. She needed to be smarter than they were. "I appreciate the encouragement," she said, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. "But I wouldn't want to monopolize everyone's attention." "Nonsense," Brian said, spreading his arms wide to address the growing crowd. "I think everyone here would love to hear some music. Wouldn't you all?" A few people nodded politely, caught off guard by being put on the spot. Others looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. But the four men seemed energized by having an audience for their game. "It would be such a gift," Mitchell added, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "to hear someone play with such passion, such natural rhythm." The words stung because Mariana could hear the assumptions behind them. These men saw her success in tech as an anomaly, something that didn't fit their worldview. But music? Oh, that made sense to them. That was where they expected to find her. She looked around at the faces watching her. Some showed genuine interest. Others reflected her own discomfort. A few seemed to be waiting for a show, whether it was beautiful music or public humiliation. The broken piano sat there like a challenge, its damaged keys gleaming under the ballroom lights. In that moment, Mariana realized she had reached a crossroads. She could walk away with dignity intact but let these men think they had won. She could confront them directly and risk being labeled as aggressive or difficult, or she could do something none of them expected. The choice would define not just this evening, but possibly her entire career. And as she stood there, surrounded by the most powerful people in Silicon Valley, Mariana began to smile. Time seemed to slow down as Mariana stood there, surrounded by expectant faces. The ballroom noise faded into a distant hum. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. This was the moment she had been dreading and preparing for her entire career. The moment when she would have to choose who she really was. The four men waited with barely concealed grins. Brian Thompson rocked back on his heels, clearly pleased with himself. Mitchell Reynolds adjusted his expensive watch as if timing how long it would take her to break. Peter Walsh and James Hartley exchanged quick glances, probably betting on whether she would cry or just walk away, but it was the faces in the growing crowd that really got to Mariana. Some people looked genuinely curious about what would happen. Next, others seemed uncomfortable as if they wanted to help but didn't know how. A few appeared to be enjoying the drama, treating this like entertainment. Then she saw Lisa Rodriguez, the venture capitalist she had been talking to earlier. Lisa's face showed something different. Anger, not at Mariana, but at the situation. Lisa shook her head slightly and started to step forward, as if she was going to intervene. Mariana held up a small hand gesture to stop her. This was her moment to handle. She had been fighting these battles alone for too long to let someone else rescue her. Now, her mind raced through the options. She could walk away. Just turn around and leave with her dignity intact. It would be the safe choice. The smart choice, according to every career guide she had ever read about navigating workplace discrimination. Don't give them ammunition. Don't react emotionally. Stay professional, but walking away meant they won. It meant they had successfully reduced her from CEO to just another person they could push around. Worse, it meant everyone watching would see that their tactics worked. She could confront them directly, call out their behavior for what it was, tell the crowd exactly what game these men were playing. Part of her wanted to do this more than anything, to finally say what she had been holding back in 1,000 similar situations, but she knew how that would play out. She would be labeled as aggressive, difficult, someone who played the race card. These men would deny any ill intent. They would say they were just trying to be friendly, just asking for some music to liven up the party. Who could argue with that? The broken piano sat there like a trap waiting to spring. Its damaged keys caught the light from the chandeliers above. She could see now that it wasn't just old or neglected. Someone had deliberately sabotaged it. The stuck keys had been jammed down, the wobbly bench leg had been loosened. Even the Loose strings looked like they had been cut rather than snapped naturally. This whole thing had been planned. The realization hit her like a cold wave. These men hadn't just happened to notice her and decide to ask her to play. They had set this up in advance. They had broken the piano specifically for this moment. They had been waiting all evening for the right opportunity to spring their trap. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Grandma Rose had cleaned these same kinds of offices for 40 years, dealing with the same kinds of men who thought they could treat people however they wanted because of their position and power. "Baby girl," her grandmother used to say, "when someone tries to make you small, you got two choices. You can shrink down to fit their tiny picture of you, or you can show them just how big you really are. But how do you show them how big you are when they've set up the game so you can't win?" Mariana thought about all the times she had chosen the safe path. All the meetings where she had stayed quiet when someone took credit for her ideas. All the conferences where she had smiled politely while people asked if she was really qualified to speak on technical topics. All the investor pitches where she had to prove herself twice as hard. As any man in the room, she was tired of playing defense. Tired of always having to be perfect, always having to prove she belonged. Tonight, these men had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated her. The crowd was getting restless. People were starting to whisper among themselves, sensing the tension but not sure what was happening. Some were checking their phones or looking around for other conversations to join. The moment was stretching too long. "Well?" Brian prompted, his fake smile starting to look strained. "Are you going to play for us or not?" Mariana looked at him, then at his three companions, then at the broken piano. A strange calm settled over her. The kind of calm she felt right before making a major business decision. The kind of clarity that came when she finally saw the solution to a complex problem. These men thought they knew exactly what would happen. Next, they expected her to either fail miserably trying to play a broken instrument or refuse and look bad in front of everyone. They had created what they thought was a perfect lose-lose situation, but they had made one critical error. They assumed she would play by their rules. "You know what?" Mariana said, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "I think that's a wonderful idea." The men's faces lit up with triumph. Brian actually rubbed his hands together in anticipation. They thought they had won. Mariana walked toward the piano, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. The crowd followed her movement, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Conversations throughout the ballroom began to quiet as word spread that something was happening near the piano. She ran her fingers along the piano's edge, examining it carefully. The craftsmanship was beautiful, even in its damaged state. This had once been a magnificent instrument. Someone had put real skill and care into building it, and someone else had deliberately destroyed it just to use as a prop in their cruel game. "It really is a beautiful piano," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Even broken like this." "Yes, well, we're hoping you can make something beautiful out of it anyway," Mitchell said, still confident he was in control of the situation. Mariana smiled. Not the polite, professional smile she had been wearing all evening. This was something different. Something that made Brian's confident expression flicker just slightly. "Oh, I absolutely will," she said. "But probably not in the way you're expecting." She walked around the piano slowly, like a general surveying a battlefield. Her mind was working fast now, putting together a plan that even she hadn't fully formed yet. But the pieces were falling into place. The crowd had grown larger. Word was spreading through the ballroom that something interesting was happening. People were abandoning their conversations and moving closer to see what would unfold. Robert Kim, the CEO she had been talking to earlier, caught her eye and nodded slightly. His expression said he understood that something bigger was happening. Here, Lisa Rodriguez had moved closer too, no longer looking like she wanted to intervene. Now she looked curious, even excited. Mariana thought about her company, TechFlow Solutions. Her whole business was built on taking broken systems and finding new ways to make them work. Not fixing them in the traditional sense, but reimagining what they could become. Maybe it was time to apply that philosophy to more than just computer systems. She placed both hands on the piano, feeling the smooth wood under her palms. The instrument was solid despite its damage. Good bones, her grandmother would have said. Something worth saving. Actually, Mariana announced to the crowd, this broken piano reminds me of something very important. Something I think everyone here should understand. The four men exchanged glances. This wasn't going according to their script. Brian's smile was completely gone now. Innovation, Mariana continued, isn't about having perfect tools or ideal conditions. It's about taking what others see as worthless and showing them its true potential. She looked directly at Brian, then at each of his companions in turn. Her smile never wavered. Shall we begin? Mariana walked around the broken piano one more time, her fingers trailing along its polished surface. The crowd had grown quiet, everyone waiting to see what she would do next. Even the waiters had stopped moving, standing still with their trays of champagne and appetizers. Brian Thompson shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. By now, she should have either walked away in embarrassment or sat down and tried to play, only to fail spectacularly when the broken keys didn't work. Instead, she looked completely calm, almost like she was enjoying herself. You know, Mariana said, her voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom, when I first started my company, people told me I was crazy. They said the tech industry was too broken for someone like me to fix. She pressed one of the stuck keys. It made a dull thunk instead of a musical note. Several people in the crowd winced at the sound. They said the old systems were too established, too set in their ways, that someone like me should probably look for opportunities elsewhere. She pressed another broken key, then another. Each one made the same flat, dead sound. Mitchell Reynolds frowned. This definitely wasn't going according to plan. That's all. Very interesting, he interrupted. But we were hoping to hear some music. Mariana smiled at him. Oh, you will. But first, let me show you something fascinating about this piano. She lifted the lid higher so everyone could see inside. The broken strings hung loose like forgotten thoughts. Some keys were jammed so far down they couldn't spring back up. The felt hammers that should hit the strings cleanly were bent and torn. Look at this, she said, pointing to the damage. This piano is completely broken. By traditional standards, it's worthless. Most people would see this and think, well, that's trash. Time to throw it away and buy a new one. Robert Kim, the DataBridge CEO, nodded slowly. He was starting to understand where this was going. But that's not how innovation works, Mariana continued. Innovation doesn't happen when everything is perfect and easy. It happens when someone looks at a broken system and asks a different question. She walked to the wobbly bench and examined its uneven legs, instead of asking, how do I fix this? Or where can I find a replacement? The real question is, what else could this become? Peter Walsh looked confused. I'm sorry, but we really just wanted to hear you play some music. And you will, Mariana said, her confidence growing with each word, but probably not the kind you were expecting. She sat down carefully on the unsteady bench, adjusting her weight to balance on its uneven legs. The crowd leaned forward, curious, despite themselves. Even Brian and his friends seemed caught up in the moment, though they clearly didn't like where this was headed. My company, TechFlow Solutions, specializes in exactly this kind of problem, Mariana explained as she positioned herself at the keyboard. Companies come to us with systems that everyone else has given up on, outdated software that crashes constantly, workflows that waste millions of dollars, processes that made sense 20 years ago but are completely broken today. She placed her hands over the damaged keys, not pressing them yet. And you know what we tell them? We say, don't think about fixing this. Think about what it could become. The ballroom was completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work to listen. Lisa Rodriguez was recording with her phone, recognizing that something important was happening. This piano, Mariana said, gesturing to the broken instrument, represents every outdated system. Every broken process, every impossible problem that people told me I'd never be able to solve. She pressed a working key near the top of the keyboard. It produced a clear, beautiful note that rang through the silent room. Then she pressed one of the broken keys next to it. The contrast was stark, music next to noise. Traditional thinking says these broken keys are failures, she said. But what if they're not? What if they're just waiting for someone to find a new way to use them? Brian Thompson was getting impatient. This is all very philosophical, but he wanted entertainment, Mariana finished for him. Something with soul, as you put it. Something authentic. The way she said authentic made several people in the crowd uncomfortable. They were starting to realize what had really been happening here. Well, here's something authentic, Mariana continued. This is exactly how innovation works in the real world. You take something everyone else has dismissed as worthless and you show them what they couldn't see. She began to play, but not in any way the men had expected. Instead of trying to coax traditional melodies from the broken keys, she used the piano as something entirely different. The working keys provided a bassline rhythm. The stuck keys became percussion instruments when she tapped them with her knuckles. The loose strings, when plucked, added an unexpected harmonic element. The sound was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever heard. It wasn't classical music or jazz or any recognizable genre. It was something completely new, created from the piano's brokenness rather than despite it. James Hartley's mouth fell open. This wasn't the humiliation they had planned. This was actually impressive. You see, Mariana said as she continued her unconventional performance, innovation isn't about having the best tools or the perfect conditions. It's about seeing possibilities where others see problems. She used the wobbly bench as part of the rhythm, rocking slightly to create a subtle percussion beat. The uneven legs that were supposed to be a flaw became a feature, adding complexity to the sound. When I started TechFlow, people said I didn't have the right background. I didn't go to the right schools. I didn't have the right connections. I didn't fit their idea of what a tech CEO should look like. Her makeshift composition grew more complex. She was using every broken part of the piano to create something beautiful and entirely unexpected. They said the industry was too broken for someone like me to make a difference, that the old networks were too established, the traditional ways too entrenched. Several people in the crowd were nodding now, recognizing their own struggles in her words. But that's exactly why I succeeded, Mariana said, her voice rising with her music. Because I didn't try to fix the system the way it was. I reimagined what it could become. The four men who had started this whole situation looked increasingly uncomfortable. Their confident smirks had been replaced by nervous glances at each other and the growing crowd. Every stuck key in this piano represents a barrier someone told me I couldn't overcome, Mariana continued, her performance reaching a crescendo. Every broken string is a limitation they said I'd have to accept. She stood up from the bench, still playing, using her full body to create music from the broken instrument. But limitations only exist if you accept them. If you play by the old rules instead of creating new ones. The crowd was completely captivated now. This wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a demonstration, a metaphor come to life. Mariana was literally showing them how to turn brokenness into beauty, how to find music in the noise. This is what innovation really looks like, she said as her unique composition reached its conclusion. It's messy. It's unexpected. It doesn't sound like anything that came before it. And it works precisely because it's different, not despite it. The last notes faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then someone started clapping, then someone else. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause, but Mariana wasn't finished yet. She had one more surprise in store. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Mariana stood beside the broken piano, her heart racing from both the performance and the adrenaline of the moment. She hadn't expected the crowd's reaction to be this enthusiastic. People weren't just clapping politely. They were genuinely moved by what they had witnessed. Lisa Rodriguez was the first to approach, her eyes bright with excitement. That was incredible, she said, her voice carrying over the continuing applause. I've never seen anything like it. Robert Kim nodded in agreement, pushing through the crowd to reach her. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You just demonstrated everything that's wrong with how we think about innovation in this industry. But it was the faces of the four men who had started this whole situation that told the real story. Brian Thompson looked like he had swallowed something bitter. His confident smirk from earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by a tight-lipped expression that barely concealed his anger. Mitchell Reynolds kept checking his watch as if he could somehow reverse time and undo what had just happened. Peter Walsh and James Hartley were whispering urgently to each other, probably trying to figure out how to salvage their reputations from this disaster. They had expected to humiliate Mariana in front of the most important people in Silicon Valley. Instead, she had turned their trap into a masterclass on innovation and creativity. The crowd was still buzzing with energy. People were talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed, pulling out their phones to share videos and photos. Several attendees were already posting on social media, using words like genius and revolutionary to describe Mariana's performance. How did you think of that? Asked a young woman Mariana didn't recognize. Using the broken parts as features instead of trying to work around them? Mariana smiled, still catching her breath. That's exactly what we do at TechFlow. Solutions every day. Most companies try to patch broken systems or replace them entirely. But sometimes the best solution is to completely reimagine what the system could become. More people gathered around, eager to hear her explain the connection between her impromptu performance and her business philosophy. The broken piano had become an unlikely focal point for the entire gala, drawing attention away from the formal program and creating an organic networking opportunity unlike anything the organizers had planned. But how do you identify which systems can be transformed versus which ones need to be replaced? Asked David Chun, the venture capitalist who had been watching from the edge of the crowd. Great question, Mariana replied, touching the piano's surface again. It comes down to understanding the difference between surface damage and structural integrity. This piano's bones are solid. The craftsmanship is excellent. The problems are all superficial, stuck keys, loose strings, and uneven bench. Those are symptoms, not diseases? She gestured to the instrument as she spoke. In business, we see the same thing constantly. Companies come to us thinking their entire system is broken, when really they just need someone to look at the problems differently. The foundation is usually sound. It's the applications that need reimagining. Brian Thompson finally couldn't contain himself any longer. This is all very interesting, he interrupted, his voice sharper than before. But let's not forget that this was supposed to be entertainment, not a business lecture. The crowd turned to look at him, and Mariana could see the moment when many people realized what had really been happening here. The faces around Brian shifted from curious to uncomfortable to openly disapproving. You're absolutely right, Mariana said smoothly. This was supposed to be entertainment. And I hope everyone found it entertaining. The subtle emphasis on supposed to be wasn't lost on anyone. Several people nodded knowingly, finally understanding the full context of what they had witnessed. I certainly did, said Lisa Rodriguez loudly. It was the most innovative performance I've ever seen at one of these events. Innovative being the key word, added Robert Kim. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need more of in our industry. Mitchell Reynolds tried to regain control of the narrative. Well, we're just glad we could provide the opportunity for such a creative demonstration, but his words fell flat. Everyone could hear the forced nature of his comment. The four men had lost control of the situation completely, and they knew it. You know what I found most impressive? Said a voice from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned to see Catherine Wells, the CEO of Quantum Industries, one of the most respected leaders in tech. The complete transformation of a negative situation into something positive and productive. Her words carried weight in the room. Catherine was known for her direct communication style and her refusal to participate in industry politics. If she was speaking up, it meant something significant had happened. That's real leadership, Catherine continued, looking directly at Mariana. Taking a situation designed to diminish you and turning it into a demonstration of your core competencies. Impressive, the crowd murmured in agreement. More phones came out as people realized they were witnessing something that would be talked about for a long time. Mariana felt a warmth spreading through her chest. Not just from the validation, but from the realization that she had fundamentally changed the energy in the room. What started as an attempt to make her smaller had somehow made everyone else think bigger. The really exciting part, Mariana said, addressing the growing crowd, is thinking about how this applies to all of our businesses. How many broken systems in our companies are actually just waiting for someone to reimagine their potential? That's a fascinating question, said a man she recognized as the CTO of a major software company. We just spent 6 months trying to fix our customer service platform. Maybe we should have been asking what else it could become instead. Exactly, Mariana replied enthusiastically. Traditional problem-solving asks, how do we make this work the way it's supposed to? But innovation asks, what if this could work in a completely different way? The conversation was taking on a life of its own now. People were sharing their own examples of systems that seemed broken but might just need reimagining. The formal networking that usually happened at these events had been replaced by something much more organic and valuable. Brian Thompson made one last attempt to redirect attention away from Mariana. This has been very educational, but perhaps we should let others enjoy the evening's planned activities. But his suggestion was met with resistance from the crowd. People were too engaged in the discussion to want to move on to formal speeches and awards presentations. Actually, said Catherine Wells, I think this is exactly the kind of conversation our industry needs to be having. Too often we get stuck in traditional approaches to problems. I agree, added Robert Kim. This is more valuable than most of the keynote speeches I've heard at these events. Mariana looked around at the faces surrounding her. What had started as an attempt to humiliate her had become something entirely different. She had turned their broken piano into a symbol of possibility. More importantly, she had shown everyone in that room that innovation wasn't just about technology or business models. It was about fundamentally changing how you see problems and opportunities. The 4 men who had orchestrated this situation were now standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, clearly wanting to leave but unable to without, making their defeat even more obvious. But Mariana wasn't finished yet. She had proven her point about innovation and creativity. Now it was time to address the real issue that had brought them to this moment. The conversation that the tech industry needed to have but usually avoided. She looked out at the sea of engaged faces and made a decision. This was her platform now. This was her moment to say what really needed to be said. Mariana took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd that had gathered around her. The energy in the room was electric, but she could sense that people were waiting for something more. They had witnessed something special, but many of them didn't fully understand what had really happened here tonight. I want to share something with all of you, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the now quiet ballroom. Something important about innovation that goes beyond just fixing broken systems. The crowd leaned in closer. Even the waiters had stopped serving drinks to listen. The most difficult systems to transform aren't the technical ones, Mariana continued. They're the human ones. The assumptions we make about who belongs where. The expectations we have about what different people can accomplish. The invisible barriers that keep talented individuals from reaching their full potential. Brian Thompson shifted uncomfortably, but he couldn't leave now without drawing even more attention to himself. Tonight, some of you witnessed an attempt to put me in what someone thought was my proper place, Mariana said, her tone remaining calm and professional, not as a CEO, not as an innovator, but as entertainment, as someone whose value came from performing rather than leading. A murmur went through the crowd as more people began to understand the full context of what they had observed. And you know what? That kind of thinking is exactly what's holding our entire industry back, she continued. When we limit our expectations of what someone can accomplish based on how they look or where they come from, We waste incredible talent. We miss out on the very innovation we claim to value. Catherine Wells nodded approvingly from the front of the crowd. Several other industry leaders were doing the same. My company has grown to over $50 million in revenue in just 5 years, Mariana said. We've helped major corporations save hundreds of millions of dollars by reimagining their broken systems. We employ over 200 people and have offices in 3 cities. She gestured toward the broken piano. But tonight, some people thought the most valuable thing I could contribute to this gathering was playing music on a broken instrument. As if my business accomplishments were somehow less important than fitting into a comfortable stereotype. The silence in the room was profound now. People were really listening, many of them recognizing their own experiences in her words. Now, I'm not sharing this to make anyone feel guilty or defensive, Mariana continued. I'm sharing it because it represents a massive missed opportunity for all of us. Robert Kim was nodding vigorously. As someone who had built his own company as an immigrant, he understood exactly what she was talking about. Think about how much innovation we lose when talented people have to spend their energy proving they belong instead of focusing on solving problems, Mariana said. Think about how many breakthrough ideas never see the light of day because someone dismissed the person who had them. A young woman in the crowd raised her hand. How do we change that? How do we create environments where everyone's ideas are valued? Great question, Mariana replied. It starts with examining our own assumptions. When someone walks into a room, what do we assume about their capabilities based on their appearance? When we hear an idea, do we evaluate it on its merits, or do we unconsciously factor in who's presenting it? She walked closer to the crowd, moving away from the piano, but keeping it visible as a reminder of what had transpired. At TechFlow, we've made inclusion a core part of our innovation process, she explained. We actively seek out perspectives that are different from the majority. Not because it's the politically correct thing to do, but because diverse viewpoints lead to better solutions. Can you give us a specific example? Asked David Chun. Absolutely, Mariana said. Last year, we were working with a major retail company that was losing millions because their inventory system kept failing. 3 different consulting firms had tried to fix it using traditional approaches. All the standard solutions focused on upgrading hardware or rewriting software. She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. But one of our team members, a woman who had worked in retail before joining tech, asked a different question. She said, "What if the system isn't failing? What if it's actually telling us something important about customer behavior that we're not listening to?" Several people in the crowd were taking notes now, recognizing the value of what she was sharing. It turned out she was right. The failures were actually patterns that revealed a completely new opportunity for personalized inventory management. Instead of fighting the system, we redesigned it to capitalize on what it was already showing us. Revenue increased by 30% in the first quarter after implementation. That's incredible, said Catherine Wells. And you think that insight came from having diverse perspectives on your team? I don't think it, Mariana replied firmly. I know it. Someone with a traditional tech background would never have asked that question because they were trained to see system failures as problems to fix, not as information to decode. The crowd was completely engaged now. This wasn't just a story about overcoming discrimination. It was a masterclass in building innovative organizations. But here's the thing, Mariana continued. That team member almost didn't get hired. 3 other companies had turned her down because they thought her retail background wasn't relevant to tech consulting. They saw her different experience as a weakness instead of a strength. Mitchell Reynolds was looking increasingly uncomfortable. He had spent his career investing in companies led by people who looked just like him. Every time we dismiss someone's potential based on their background or appearance, we might be throwing away the next breakthrough idea, Mariana said. Every time we make assumptions about who belongs in leadership roles, we might be limiting our own success. She looked directly at the 4 men who had started this whole situation. Tonight could have gone very differently. Someone tried to reduce me to a stereotype, to make me smaller so they could feel more comfortable. But instead it became an opportunity to demonstrate exactly why that kind of thinking is so destructive. Brian Thompson looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Because innovation doesn't come from comfort, Mariana continued. It comes from challenging assumptions, from looking at problems differently, from bringing together people who see the world in unique ways. A man near the back of the crowd spoke up. So what can we do differently? How do we make sure we're not missing out on great talent because of our unconscious biases? Start by questioning your first impressions, Mariana replied. When you meet someone new, ask yourself what assumptions you're making about their capabilities. Challenge yourself to look beyond surface characteristics and focus on their ideas and accomplishments. It's also about creating environments where different perspectives are not just tolerated but actively sought out, added Lisa Rodriguez. Making sure that when decisions are made, diverse voices are part of the conversation. Exactly, Mariana agreed. And it's about recognizing that the most valuable team members might not look like what you expected. The next great innovator might come from a background you never considered. She gestured once more toward the broken piano. Just like this piano taught us that broken doesn't mean worthless, we need to learn that different doesn't mean less capable. In fact, different might be exactly what we need to solve our most challenging problems. The crowd erupted in applause again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just appreciation for a clever performance. It was recognition of a fundamental truth about innovation and human potential. But as the applause died down, Mariana realized that something even more significant was happening. People weren't just clapping. They were pulling out business cards. They were starting conversations. They were making connections. The real transformation was just beginning.